everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tony's Tack Tips, a channel for the what, how, and why of horsemanship. Today is the first episode of my new 4-part mini-series, all about bits. Today we'll be talking about the materials and the mechanics of bits. So that's what you can make a bit out of, and how the bits work. So quick disclaimer right from the get-go, I am a giant bit nerd. I think bits are like the coolest thing ever. I could talk about them for hours. I will do my best to not and to still listen to a small 4-part video. Anyway, continuing. So let's start at the beginning. What is a bit? The bit, if you've watched my parts of the bridle video, is the metal part of the bridle that goes in the horse's mouth. This is what connects to the reins and what you use to help steer and communicate with your horse. At the core, there are two separate categories of bits. There are snaffles, or direct pressure bits, and leverage bits. Now these categories are really, really broad, and there's about 50 billion types of bits that you can use on your horse, and everyone functions a little bit differently. But the main difference is that in a snaffle, or direct pressure bit, the amount you pull on the reins is the amount that the horse feels in their mouth. However, a leverage bit will utilize shanks, as seen here, or some other type of mechanism so that the horse will feel double or even triple the amount that you pull on the reins. So the bit itself sits in the interdental space of the mouth, also called the bars. And this is the space in between the horse's two sets of teeth. They have their front teeth and all their incisors, and their molars in the back that grind, and they're a lot flatter. But there's this little space, and that is where the bit sits. The bit is sitting in between the two sets of teeth, over the tongue, and then connects to the reins right at the corners of the mouth. So that means when you pull on the reins, you're exerting pressure not only on the corner of the horse's mouth, but on the very sensitive bars and on the tongue. And the way the bit is shaped, the number of joints it has, or the material will affect how the pressure is felt in the horse's mouth, and therefore how they respond. A bit is made up of a couple different parts. First, you have the bit rings, or the bit ends, which is what the reins and the bridle will attach to. These can have different shapes, such as a D-ring or a loose ring, and that will affect how the bit sits in the horse's mouth, but we'll talk about that more in another video. The next part is the mouthpiece, which is this part all the way from this bit ring to this bit ring. This is the part that goes in the horse's mouth. Specifically, in a jointed bit, either single jointed or double jointed, this singular part from the joint to the bit end is called the cannon. So if someone says the cannons of the bit, they mean this part and this part. And those are the parts that sit directly on the bars of the mouth. They can have different shapes as well, such as a corkscrew or a slow twist, or even a triangle, which will again affect how the pressure is felt in the horse's mouth. We'll talk about that later. This is Grammy, like the award. She's one of our beginner horses, and she goes in a very simple D-ring snaffle. So like I said before, snaffle means that it's a direct pressure bit. So the amount that I pull is the amount that she feels. So let's take a look at that. So the bit that Miss Grammy uses, as I said, is called a D-ring snaffle. As you can see here, it's got one joint. So that means the joint is going to sit just over her tongue. When you pull, the joint goes up, relieving pressure from the tongue. And if you pull hard enough, it can actually go up into the palate and create a nutcracker effect. So as you can see, there are no shanks, and both the bridle and the reins can more or less freely rotate on this ring. Therefore, when I pull on the reins, there's a bit of give in the bridle, and there's no leverage asserted. So the exact amount I pull is the amount that she feels. But let's take a look at what she's actually feeling in her mouth. The bit itself is sitting on the bars of her mouth, in between her two sets of teeth. As you can see here, it sits over her tongue. So when I pull on the bit here, the joint moves up a little bit, releasing pressure from her tongue and potentially adding a bit of pressure to the top of her mouth, otherwise known as the palate. That single joint can have a nutcracker effect. So in a leverage bit such as this is specifically called a curb bit. This is actually a Western bit, but it's constructed in a similar way. You have your mouthpiece. This is a double jointed bit, but you still have your cannons from here to here and here to here. This part in the middle is called a roller. Gives the horse something to play with. Again, something we'll talk about in another video. But leverage bits, instead of having bit rings, they usually have shanks, which is this part that goes from the edge of the mouthpiece all the way down to the rein ring, or where the rein attaches. Up here is where it attaches to the bridle, and this notch here is for the curb strap. We'll talk more about what curb straps are and how they affect leverage bits later. But the key difference between the snaffle and the leverage bit is this shank, because this shank is what gives you that extra pressure on their mouth, or that leverage. So this is Miss Belle, and she is the princess of our lesson program, but she's also a bit strong and one of our more advanced horses. So on her, we use a pelham, which is a type of leverage bit. So the pelham is a leverage bit, like we talked about. As you can see, it's got this shank. So rather than the snaffle rein, where I pull on it and she feels the exact amount of pressure that I'm pulling, this shank gives me that extra leverage so that when I pull, extra pressure is exerted through this strap at the pull and through this shank. Additionally, most leverage bits utilize a curb chain, which uses the nerve cluster here at the curb groove to create leverage. So when I pull, the chain goes into the curb groove and adds pressure and leverage, which encourages her to lift her head. And that's how leverage bits work. So there's a very important point to clarify here, and that is how bits work. Bits work off pressure that you exert on the horse's mouth. They do not work off of pain. Depending on how the bit is constructed, a bit can be more severe or less severe. However, in every case, a bit is designed to work off pressure exerted on the horse's mouth, not pain. Yes, it's true. Any bit, from the most severe wire bit to the nicest, simplest snaffle, can cause pain in the wrong hands. Just like with any tool or piece of equipment you use with a horse, used improperly, it can cause the horse pain. That's why it's very important for the rider to understand how the bit they have in their horse's mouth works, where it exerts pressure, how it exerts pressure, so they can use their hand accordingly. So the other main thing, other than joints or mouthpiece construction, that affects how the horse reacts to the bit in their mouth is the material that you make the bit out of. So the most common material for bits is just regular stainless steel. It's just metal, it's warm or cold depending on the temperature. It's always a good idea on a cold day to warm the bit up in your hand. However, there's a couple different metals that you can use in your bits to make your horses accept them a little bit easier. So a really common bit material is copper. So copper is a little bit softer than stainless steel, and it also warms up a lot quicker. And what that causes it to do is the horse will salivate a lot more in a copper bit than they will in a regular stainless steel bit. In theory, that salivation encourages the horse to play with the bit and will help them accept it a little bit more. Oftentimes, such as with this bit, bits with rollers, the rollers themselves will be copper instead of the entire bit, so you still have the hardness of the stainless steel with that extra salivation. Another material that's coming into popularity are these gold bits. I believe the most common brand of these is New Schul. It's softer than stainless steel and actually also softer than copper, which makes the bit a little bit nicer in the horse's mouth, encourages salivation, which then encourages acceptance of the bit. And finally, there's sweet iron. So sweet iron is very similar to your stainless steel or iron bits, but it actually rusts a lot faster. It's very common to see Western bits, such as this one, as sweet iron rather than regular stainless steel or iron. So the sweet iron, you can start to see on the back here, will rust a lot faster than normal iron or stainless steel. And what that does is similar to the copper, it will increase salivation and acceptance of the bit, which can make them kind of a pain to clean. So then there are our non-nettle bit materials. So these can come in the form of a latex wrap. A lot of racehorses, instead of using polo wraps, will actually use latex polo wraps that stick to each other. That way they won't come undone during the race. This latex wrap is also really helpful if you want to wrap a bit and make it just a little bit softer and nicer on the bars of the mouth than a regular metal bit. So this bit here is just a regular loose ring, stainless steel like this, covered in latex, or as I like to call it sometimes, happy mouth wrap. And that just makes it a little bit squishier, a little bit warmer, and a little bit softer in the horse's mouth. Similarly, you can coat a bit in rubber. And same thing, this makes the bit a little bit softer, a little easier to chew on. The other thing it does is it makes the bit wider. By making the bit wider, you're increasing the contact surface on the bars of the mouth, which helps spread out that pressure rather than concentrated in one spot, which makes it a little bit softer and less severe. For more finicky horses, there are even leather bits. And leather bits will be a lot softer and they'll actually, over time, conform to the shape of the horse's mouth. That way, when you pull, it's a bit more molded, a bit softer, or less severe than a regular metal bit. The only problem with these is horses like to chew on them. As you can see, this one's kind of falling apart here. An alternative to leather, because as you saw, that one can kind of get chewed through, is biothane. So biothane is kind of like a leather alternative. As far as I know, it's completely vegan, and it's coming into popularity as a new alternative tack material. You can also use biothane to make bits. And so a similar idea, this will kind of conform to the horse's mouth. It's a lot softer than a metal bit. You can see it bends here. And this is my bridleless bit. I'll talk more about this in another video. I love it. But the thing with biothane is it doesn't conform as much as leather does. That way, when you pull and release, there's a bit more of a give than in a leather bit. The other thing is it's a lot more durable than leather is, so it won't get chewed through quite as easily. So another good alternative if you want a very soft bit with a bit more give and a bit more durable. And finally, you have your plastic bits. So a very popular brand of plastic bits is called Happy Mouth. There's also a brand of blue bits. I don't recall exactly what the name is, but they're blue. But the plastic is a lot warmer and a lot lighter than metal is. The bit just sitting in their mouth won't put as much pressure on the bars or the tongue as a metal bit would. It's also a lot warmer and in general just a lot softer, as there's a bit more give to it than a metal bit. So specifically in a mullen mouth bit like this, which mullen mouth means straight bar across, I'll talk about that more in my Snapple mouthpieces video. That means that when I pull on either of the reins, there will be a slight give this way, whereas in a metal bit there wouldn't be, which makes it a little bit softer, a little bit easier on the mouth. The plastic itself is very durable, but as you can see, there are a lot of chew marks on it, and it will not be quite as durable as a metal bit. So definitely a great alternative to metal, but won't necessarily last as long. And that about wraps it up for today. That is just a brief skim on the surface of the wonderful world that is bits. Be sure to stay tuned for the next 3 parts in our series where we'll go over snaffle bits, leverage bits, and then some unconventional or different bits. And we'll be talking about how they work, why they work, and what kind of horses I think you should use it on. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I hope you learned a lot about bits, and I hope you stay tuned for the next 3 parts of my series. If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Toni's Tack Tips for announcements about new videos and exclusive behind the scenes content. Thanks so much for watching, and remember to always ask why. Bye for now. Is that what you wanted? Exactly like that.